Hi, everyone. My name's Jenna, and I'm 21. I live in Seattle, in a quiet neighborhood with my mom and my stepdad, Daniel. Life has been unique, to say the least, since my mom married him. My mom had been single for years, doing everything she could to raise me on her own. When Daniel came into the picture, it felt like a relief for her. He was calm, steady, and seemed to understand us both right away. Growing up with just my mom, I hadn't been used to having another adult around, especially one so involved. Daniel helped my mom settle into a new chapter of her life. But over time, something in our home shifted, subtly at first, but it was enough for me to notice. I started seeing him not just as mom's husband, but as someone else entirely. The story I'm about to tell is complicated and deeply personal, so I hope you'll stick with me to the end. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. It was a warm Saturday evening, and I had just come back home after a day out with friends. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag, and headed to my room, feeling that unique blend of exhaustion and contentment that only comes after a good day. I closed the door behind me, pulled off my top, and tossed it onto the bed. With a deep breath, I unhooked my bra and let it slip down my arms, feeling the relief of freedom after a long day. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, my hair a bit messy, cheeks slightly flushed from being out in the sun. I couldn't help but smile, just appreciating the small moment of peace. My clothes were scattered across the bed, a dress I'd planned to wear, jeans I'd changed out of earlier, and I was deciding what to put on next when I suddenly heard a soft creak. I turned, thinking I'd imagined it, but the door to my room slowly edged open, revealing Daniel standing there. I froze, caught off guard, my bare shoulders tensing as I instinctively grabbed the shirt closest to me on the bed. My heart raced a bit, but I tried to play it cool, even as I felt a blush creeping up my neck. "Oh, sorry," Daniel said, quickly averting his eyes and taking a step back. "Didn't mean to barge in. I thought you were downstairs." I managed a small laugh, slipping the shirt on. "It's okay. I didn't hear you knock." He looked a bit flustered, one hand still on the doorknob. "I did. Well, sort of. But it's my fault. I should have waited. I just came by to see if you needed anything. Your mom's out running errands, and I thought I'd order dinner." It was such a small thing, but his attention felt different that day, even in that ordinary offer. His gaze softened as he lingered in the doorway, and there was something about the way he looked at me that made my pulse quicken in a way I hadn't felt before. "That sounds great. I haven't eaten since lunch," I said, hoping my voice sounded steady. Daniel nodded, lingering a moment longer before he looked away. "All right, I'll call for delivery then. Italians sound good." "Perfect," I replied, and after another second of shared silence, he left, closing the door gently behind him. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling my heart rate slowly settle. But there was something different about our exchange, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Dinner arrived half an hour later, and we set up in the living room, each of us balancing plates on our laps as we watched a show on TV. We usually had family dinners around the table, but with Mom out, it felt a bit more relaxed, more casual. "Thanks for the food," I said between bites. "This is exactly what I needed." He smiled, leaning back in his chair. "I'm glad. It's nice to spend some time together, just the two of us." I nodded, surprised by the warmth in his tone, like he genuinely enjoyed our time together. Our relationship had always been comfortable but respectful. He'd been in my life for years now, yet tonight felt different, like we were really seeing each other for the first time. As the night went on, we talked about everything from work and school to travel plans, and the conversation flowed naturally, our laughter filling the room. When we finally finished eating, I stretched out on the couch, feeling relaxed and content. He sat beside me, a little closer than usual, and neither of us seemed eager to end the moment. "So, what's next on the list?" he asked, glancing over at me with a playful grin. "Movie? Or are you too tired?" I shrugged, smiling back. "I could stay up for a movie. But only if you let me pick." He chuckled. "All right, it's a deal. Pick your favorite." I stole a glance his way, noticing how relaxed he looked, one hand resting casually on the couch close to mine. We didn't speak much, just sat there in comfortable silence, the glow from the screen casting a warm light over both of us. At one point, Our hands brushed as we both reached for the popcorn bowl at the same time. I felt a spark, something that made me pause, my hand lingering just a moment longer than it should have. He noticed too, pulling his hand back slightly, but his eyes met mine in a way that made me feel as if we were both sharing an unspoken understanding. We both turned our attention back to the screen, but it was clear neither of us was really watching the movie anymore. My mind kept replaying that small touch, the warmth of his hand against mine. I tried to ignore the way my heart was racing, but every so often, I'd catch him stealing glances in my direction, his gaze softer than usual, as though he were seeing me in a different light. The room felt warmer, and I was suddenly aware of every inch between us. I shifted slightly, trying to calm my nerves, but it only seemed to draw his attention. He leaned back, his arm stretching casually along the back of the couch, fingers just a whisper away from my shoulder. "So, what do you like about this movie?" His voice was soft, almost like he was breaking the silence just to hear my voice. I glanced at him, a small smile playing on my lips. "I don't know, I guess it's the way they don't realize how they feel about each other until later. It's subtle, but there's this tension." He nodded, his gaze still fixed on me. "Yeah, I get that. Sometimes, you don't notice what's right in front of you until it's too late." The way he said it, with that quiet intensity, made me hold my breath. The air between us seemed to grow heavier, and I could feel the shift in the atmosphere as if we were both waiting for something, teetering on the edge of a line neither of us was sure we were ready to cross. I glanced down, my hand resting near his on the couch. Without thinking, I let my fingers drift closer, brushing against his in a way that felt both accidental and deliberate. His hand turned, palm facing up, and before I knew it, our fingers had intertwined. The touch was soft, tentative, but it sent a warmth flooding through me, a warmth that I couldn't ignore. "Are you okay with this?" he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and nodded. "Yeah, I am." We sat there, our hands gently entwined, letting the silence speak for us. His thumb traced light circles on the back of my hand, a soothing, steady motion that only made my pulse quicken. Slowly he turned toward me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he leaned in, his face inches from mine, his breath warm against my skin. Our eyes locked, and without another word, he closed the distance between us. His lips brushed against mine, soft and tentative, a question that I answered by leaning into him. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, but it quickly deepened, both of us surrendering to the moment we'd both been holding back from. Time seemed to stand still as we lost ourselves in each other. His hand came up to cup my cheek, his touch tender, his thumb tracing my jawline as our kiss deepened. I felt a warmth spread through me, a warmth that went beyond the physical, as if we were sharing more than just a kiss, but an unspoken understanding. When we finally pulled back, breathless, his forehead rested against mine, and he looked at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. "I don't want to do anything you're not comfortable with," he whispered, his gaze soft and sincere. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions swirling within me. "I know, but this feels right. Maybe we should take it slow," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, though his gaze lingered on mine, full of warmth and something deeper. I held his hand a little tighter, not wanting the moment to end. The words left unspoken hung in the air, and somehow, we both knew we were on the same page. Neither of us was ready to say goodbye, not yet. "Do you want to come upstairs?" I asked softly, the question escaping me before I could second-guess it. He looked at me, surprised, and then a gentle smile crept across his face. "Yeah," he replied, his voice barely above a murmur, as if speaking any louder would break the delicate spell that surrounded us. Our steps were slow as we climbed the stairs together, our hands still intertwined. My heart pounded, each step feeling like an eternity as the air grew thick with anticipation. I opened the door to my room, and we stepped inside, the soft light casting shadows on the walls that seemed to mirror the quiet excitement between us. Once inside, we both paused, unsure for a moment of what came next. I turned to him, feeling a mix of shyness and exhilaration, but the way he looked at me put me at ease. His gaze was steady, his expression one of tenderness and understanding. He reached out, his hand gently brushing my cheek as his fingers tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me, and I felt myself lean into him, my eyes drifting shut. When I opened them, he was watching me, his eyes full of emotions that mirrored my own. Without another word, he leaned in, his lips meeting mine in a soft, lingering kiss. This time, there was no hesitation, no need to hold back. Our hands moved instinctively, exploring, as if memorizing every touch, every sensation. His fingers trailed down my arm, sending tingles across my skin, and I felt my heart race as he held me close. He gently led me toward the bed, and I let him, the warmth of his embrace grounding me as we settled onto the soft covers. The world outside faded away, leaving only the two of us in our own little universe, a place where nothing else mattered. As we lay there, close and connected, he whispered soft reassurances, his voice like a soothing melody. Every touch, every kiss, was filled with a kind of care and understanding that made me feel safe, cherished. He held me as if I were something precious, and I felt my heart swell with emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Hours seemed to pass in a blur of whispered words and gentle caresses, a timeless dance that made everything else fade into the background. Lying beside him, with his arms wrapped around me, I felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. He looked at me with that warm smile, his hand still gently holding mine, a silent promise in his gaze. "No matter what happens, this moment is ours," he whispered, and I nodded, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep within my heart. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden light through the window that painted our surroundings in warm, comforting hues. As we lay there, I felt his hand trace gentle circles along my arm, each touch so delicate it was as if he were afraid to break the spell between us. He looked at me with a soft intensity, his gaze lingering on my face as though he were memorizing every feature. "Did you ever imagine," I started, my voice barely more than a whisper, "that we'd find ourselves here?" He chuckled softly, the sound warm and filled with affection. "Not in a million years," he admitted, a hint of awe in his voice. "But now that we're here, I can't imagine being anywhere else." He reached over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my skin, sending a warm shiver through me. It felt surreal, lying there with him as the world outside slowly awakened. I let my hand rest on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under my fingertips. Somehow, it felt like our hearts were beating in sync, each thump drawing us closer together. We lay there in silence, a comfortable warmth enveloping us, and as he gently pulled me closer, I felt my pulse quicken, my breath hitching in anticipation. His hand moved down my arm, fingers trailing like whispers along my skin, until he took my hand in his, intertwining our fingers. It felt like a connection beyond words, an unspoken understanding that neither of us wanted this moment to end. In the quiet, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss on my forehead, his lips warm and lingering, as if savoring the closeness. My heart raced as his gaze softened, his hand sliding down my cheek and tilting my chin up until our eyes met. His lips brushed against mine in a kiss that felt like the beginning of something new, a promise wrapped in tenderness and sincerity. As the early morning sunlight bathed the room in golden light, he whispered, "I could stay like this forever." His voice was filled with a tenderness that made my heart flutter, and I found myself nodding, feeling the same desire to make this moment last. We spent the rest of the morning wrapped up in each other, sharing whispered stories and secrets, our laughter filling the quiet room. It felt like we'd been transported to our own private world, where the outside world didn't matter, and time seemed to stand still. Eventually, we realized the day was moving forward without us. I watched him as he leaned back, stretching and running a hand through his hair, a contented smile lingering on his lips. "Let's make this our little secret," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a playful glint. There was something thrilling in the idea of sharing this beautiful moment with only each other, a bond that no one else could touch. As we slowly, reluctantly, pulled ourselves from the warmth of the bed, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. Joy, excitement, a touch of nervousness, but most of all, a sense of happiness I hadn't known was possible. We shared a lingering hug, his arms wrapped tightly around me, as if reluctant to let go. Just as we were savoring the quiet aftermath of our time together, I heard the faint sound of a car door closing outside. I felt a shock of reality rush through me. My stomach dropped as I looked at him, and his eyes widened with the same realization. "Is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, scrambling to gather myself. My heart pounded in my chest, and a nervous energy took over as we rushed to look like we hadn't just been wrapped up in each other. The sound of the front door opening sent a wave of urgency through both of us. "Quick!" I whispered, frantically grabbing the nearest piece of clothing. I straightened my shirt, trying to make everything look as casual as possible. He adjusted himself, running his hand through his hair and smoothing out his clothes, looking around to make sure nothing seemed out of place. "Hey! I'm home early," my mom's voice called out, echoing through the hallway. We both froze, sharing one last look, trying to silently reassure each other. She stepped into the living room, her eyes falling on us almost immediately. Her expression shifted from surprise to curiosity, though she didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. I took a deep breath, my heart racing, trying to keep calm. "Oh, hi," I greeted her, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically, but it was all I could manage. "How was the trip?" She set her bag down, glancing between us with a slight frown. "It was fine. Just a last-minute change in schedule." "What have you two been up to?" she asked, giving us a small, casual smile, though her gaze lingered a bit longer on both of us than usual. "Oh, nothing much, just watching a movie," he replied, keeping his tone light, and moving over to grab the remote as if to reinforce the story. He shot me a quick, reassuring smile, which I tried to return, hoping it didn't look as strained as it felt. "Did you have fun?" I asked, trying to direct the conversation back to her. She nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took a seat. "I did, but I'm exhausted," she said, stretching as she sank into the couch. "It's nice to be home." She seemed at ease, though I couldn't help but feel a sense of suspense hanging in the air, like the tension between us was just waiting to be noticed. As she started talking about her trip, I felt his hand subtly brush against mine in reassurance. It was a small gesture, but it grounded me in the moment, reminding me that even with this unexpected twist, we were in this together.